Hi lovely people, and welcome to the 6th instalment of Book Chat.
Sophie Vlogs.
First of all, we have A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. I am a Game of Thrones / A Song of Ice and Fire fan. I am very not up to date on the TV series, but I'm very up to date on the book series. My brother lent me this book, or I don't know if he lent it to me so much as when he reads books that he no longer wants, he just gives them to me, which I'm not complaining, it's quite a nice system. This is set a century before the first Game of Thrones book, Game of Thrones, starts. Follows a hedge knight called Dunk / Sir Duncan the Tall, and a Targaryen prince called Aegon / nicknamed Egg, as Egg sort of becomes Dunk's squire. This is actually 3 smaller books put into one volume, and I really liked this. I started reading A Song of Ice and Fire after I was halfway through the first season of Game of Thrones, and I decided I really liked it. So I bought all of the books and I read them in a massive flurry in my first week of university, and it was like a very intense but like great reading experience. And so obviously I had all of them available, and just as I was finishing A Feast for Crows, A Dance with Dragons was released, so I didn't really have to wait for them, whereas now I'm experiencing what probably a lot of hardcore long-term George R.R. Martin fans have been experiencing for a while, which is waiting for him to write more. So this was just really nice to dip my toe back into those waters and to remember that actually I do really find George R.R. Martin's writing quite good. Like, I just find it very easy to read, very enjoyable. It's quite a quick read, I find. They're quite chunky books normally, but I do find them quite easy to read. So yeah, this was really good. It was nice to get a little bit of back history to the world, so like people and events that are mentioned in A Song of Ice and Fire are like explored a bit more in this, and then I hit up the wiki and I was like learning about what happens to all these characters. So yeah, really enjoyed this, and I want more Game of Thrones to come out. After that we have The Prince of Mist by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is actually the first book he ever had published. I am a big Carlos Ruiz Zafón fan. I read Shadow of the Wind is like one of my favourite books of all time. I think it's great. So I've read the books that follow on from that sort of do that story, if you will. So this is the first book he ever had published, and it's written for a YA audience rather than an adult audience. But you can still really see like the seeds and his style and stuff. Whilst it is written a bit simpler and for a younger audience and stuff like that, you can really still read this and be like, oh yeah, of course that's the same author. It tells the story of this family who they relocate to the sort of seaside because like war is happening / coming / that sort of thing. The dad's a watchmaker, and we follow our main character Max, and sort of the house they've moved to has this sort of sad history to it, and the garden, he discovers this big thing which has lots of statues of this circus, and there's this big shipwreck which has like a tragic story behind it, and essentially like something freaky's going on and it's not all okay, and Max and his sister and this friend that they've made, Roland, are sort of uncovering what's happening. It's very, if you've read Shadow of the Wind, you'll know there's sort of like that gothic mystery element, which still is in this, just like a YA version of that. But still, I have to admit, there were a couple of moments of this which I found super fucking creepy. And don't read this if you don't like clowns. If just like the thought of clowns freaks you out, then there's like a clown figure in this who is hella freaky. So this was enjoyable, and it's part of a series. I think there's 3 books in the series, or at least I have 3 books in the series, so I'm probably going to keep reading it, and it will probably feature in more book chats in the future. Third book for today is Black Swan Green by David Mitchell. I've previously read Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, and I liked it, but I had like a feeling of a slight lack. I think I just wanted a bit more from it that it wasn't giving me, and I can't entirely verbalise to you what I wanted. But, so I enjoyed it, and it is a book that stayed with me that I've thought about a lot, but it's also a book that I'm not entirely in love with. My mum really enjoyed Cloud Atlas, so she bought a lot of his books. There's a small theme here which will feature more heavily in following book chats, which is we're moving house. I live with my mum at the moment until I have a job and can move out. She's moving house, and I have a lot of books that my family members have lent to me that I just haven't read. So I'm trying to read them all and return them all so that by the time I move, my book collection is like my book collection, not here are all the books that are actually my family's and I've just kept them for years. So I'm sort of putting all my personal reading goals on hold, and I'm just reading all of these books at the moment. So it's going to be like an interesting mix, I think, in upcoming book chats, hopefully. Back to this book in hand. This book my mum really wanted me to read because the time it's set in, like the late 70s, or I think it's early 80s actually, is the time she was at secondary school, and this focuses on a boy called Jason and his experiences at secondary school from like sort of like 12 to 13 going on 14 type thing. And when she was reading it, she was just like, this is exactly what my high school experience was like. So that was really interesting. I have to say that I enjoyed this, but I wasn't blown away by it. It took me about half the book, I think, to properly get into it. There was a good portion of it where I was sort of reading it because I'm trying to get through these books that have been lent to me, and I was like, oh, I'll just keep reading it. And then about halfway through I properly got more into it. And it's sort of just like a snapshot into Jason's experience, what growing up in that time was like. Stuff like the Falklands War is explored in this, and also just, you know, what being an adolescent boy in that time is like, and the social hierarchy of secondary school and stuff like that. It also has a tiny nod to Cloud Atlas in it, which isn't a massive, like, it didn't become a massive plot line like I wondered if it was, but it's just like tying it into that universe a bit, which I found interesting. And I wonder, I have a couple more David Mitchells to read, which also lent to me by my mum, and I wonder if there's going to be a theme, like, are they all supposed to be set in the same, like, universe, or is it just this one ties in a little bit? We'll find out. Another notable thing that happened to me since I last made a video is I joined the library, because I saw on Twitter the other day that Samantha Shannon, she tweeted about how if you take books out of the library, authors get paid for that. And I didn't know that. I had no idea. They get like checks and stuff. So I was like, well, and also I believe in supporting libraries, and I was like, well, how can I believe in supporting libraries if I don't actually join a library and get books out of a library and therefore support a library? So I've joined the library. It was very exciting. I got a bit overexcited. I took out too many books. I've had a whale of a time. I need to stop going to the library until I finish my mission of clearing all the books lent to me. But like, I'm enjoying it. What this little ramble means is I took out a bunch of books from the library, I read them, I want to talk about them, but I returned them, so I can't physically show them to you. However, a bunch of these are graphic novels, and I have Instagrammed like a page or like a pretty thing from them on my Instagram feed. So I'll leave a link to my Instagram below so you can see those if you want like a taster of what they're like. Alternatively, Google them. So first up is not a graphic novel, and that is Pandoras Daughters, The Secret History of Enterprising Women by Jane Robinson, who I mentioned in my non-fiction book haul because I bought Blue Stockings by her. I haven't read that one yet, but I saw this one in the library, it seemed interesting, and I thought, let's see what she's like. I really liked her. She does a lot of, I gather, non-fiction books that sort of explore like a topic, so like Blue Stockings. Whereas in this case, this book is all about women who she sort of discovered whilst doing research for all these other books, that she doesn't have a book to put them in, but she really wants to talk about them. So instead, it's like this history of, when she says enterprising women, she's specifically talking about women who went into fields which were not associated with women's fields, and made a name for themselves, or were successful, or persevered despite the odds, and stuff like this. So you start in antiquity, and you work up to sort of like Second World War-y type things. There's a lot of British women, some American women, and then a bit from elsewhere, but it's sort of mainly like a European / North American focus. It was super interesting. I feel like I've learned a lot about some women who I had no idea existed, and then some of them I was like, it's you, I know you, like Artemisia from the Persian Wars. I was like, hey, we've met. but then there were like a lot of other people who I didn't know about. So it's a really interesting mix, and she sort of groups it. She's sort of going through chronologically, but drawing like a theme from each time period she's looking at. Essentially, super interesting if you want to just read about some cool women doing some cool stuff in times when that was unusual. I would seriously recommend it. It was super interesting. Now, onto the graphic novels. I've written down the names so I don't forget them. First of all, we have Seasonariana, which is written by Seasonariana and based on illustrations done by Monya Chitraka. This is a retelling of the Ramayana, but from Sita's point of view. The Ramayana is like a ancient epic Hindu poem, and this graphic novel is based on illustrations which I think already existed that the artist did, and then the writer used these as the start point and then built the narrative around them. But it explores the events of this epic, but from Sita's point of view. There was a really great bit about how war is sort of merciful to the men because they either get to live a hero or they die, and they don't have to live with the consequences, whereas to women, war is when you see the men you love die, and then your children enslaved, you enslaved, and you have to live with those consequences. That was like my favourite panel, because I like read that bit and I was like, oof, yes. It's very like reminiscent of like, you know, my primarily background with epics is like the Iliad and stuff, and you have a lot of like women lamenting and using laments to be able to verbalise those things they're not able to say, and I felt like this entire graphic novel was sort of like that lament. So Sita's able to, in this situation, verbalise the wrongs that have been done her in a way that she wasn't able to be done in the original text. I should also specify I haven't read the original text. I do want to read it, just haven't done it yet. But I am vaguely familiar with what the plot is. So this was really interesting to read, but it's also made me want to read the original so that I have a bit better understanding and also learn a bit more about the context, because I don't entirely know stuff about the context. So interesting little toe dip, but want to like dive into those waters a bit more. After that, we have the one that I was like super ridiculously excited about, which is The Magic Flute by P. Craig Russell, which is a graphic novel interpretation of Mozart's opera. And if there are two things I love in this world, it is opera and graphic novels. And to have them combined was just lovely. I really want to go see The Magic Flute. My like opera watching experience is still quite young, but I saw Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro last February, and I saw Puccini's La Boheme this February, and I'm going to be going to see hopefully Tosca and also Don Giovanni later on in 2018. So I like opera. This was really interesting. The story of The Magic Flute is very weird. It's quite fantastical, and so I think it really lends itself to a graphic novel, especially the type of art that P. Craig Russell has. It's very like, I look at it and I know he did artwork for stuff like Elric, and I can really see that connection with the type of art style he has. I would automatically associate it with like fantasy and maybe sci-fi as well, but that sort of a sphere. So this opera, which is very fantastical, really works well in that format, I think. The colours were gorgeous. I just really specifically liked the little storyline with Papagena. I thought it was great. So yeah, it also made me want to go away and like learn a bit more about the plotline of the opera, because I'm like familiar with the music, but apparently there's all this stuff to do with like Freemasonry in it, which I had no idea about, so I need to get my Wikipedia on. But really liked that graphic novel. Really, he's done more graphic novel versions of operas that I really want to read. Next we have The Rime of the Modern Mariner by Nick Hayes, which visually I was so loving. It's all done in black, white and like a pale blue. So there's like a real recurring motif of like spirals, and it's not like filled in colour. As if I'm drawing like the outline of the things in blue and then on a background of colour, and then like it flips it, and I don't really know how to describe it. Please Google it. It's flipping gorgeous. The art is my favourite thing about this. It's sort of a reinterpretation of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, except for it's sort of brought it up to date by looking at it through like an environmental theme. So there's a whole lot of stuff about like the pollution we are putting into oceans and that sort of thing, which like I care about the environment. Global warming freaks me the fuck out and genuinely scares me, and I think we should be doing a lot more to deal with it. At the same time, I did feel like the actual, whilst the words, there were parts of it where, especially like the language he's using and the way that it sounds when you read it, it's like gorgeous. I didn't think the words were the strongest part of this. I felt like the visuals were really strong, and the words occasionally you're just like, okay, I get it, you've made your point, we're good, I'm all signed up to this. Yeah. So like, a mixed bag. More of a like a 3.5/3.75 out of 5, I would say. But beautiful nonetheless. And finally, thank you for sticking with me this long. It's been a very long book chat. Next one will be shorter, I promise. The final graphic novel is The Conference of Birds by Peter Sis, which is an adaptation of the 12th century Sufi epic poem. Can we see that I really like epic poetry, and graphic novel interpretations of them are like, yes. This was good, but I didn't love it, but that's fine. The Conference of Birds is really famous, and I've heard of it before, so it was interesting to sort of read this and get an actual sense of what it's like. There wasn't a lot of text in this. It was very image heavy, and not necessarily, it's not like a graphic novel where you have panels that move through and tell you a narrative. It's sort of like each double page spread is like a cohesive whole with like a little bit of text on each one. And not having the context of what The Conference of Birds reads like, I don't know if he's simplified it a lot, but I feel like maybe he has cut a lot out because there's really not a lot of text. But it was really interesting. Again, it's made me want to read the original. So this has been an exceptionally long book chat, and I thank you for sticking with me for all this time. It's just been like a really interesting reading month. The future book chats will be less busy than this, I think, because I'm hopefully going to be employed soon and have less time to read, which is a sadness, but also like a joy, because I have too much free time. As per usual, let's make this book chat a two-way thing. If you have thoughts on anything mentioned, do let me know. If you have recommendations based on anything mentioned, also let me know. If you have questions because I've just been a rambly, unclear mess, express those thoughts to me in the comments below. I will be back next week with something that is probably going to be a book review, just so that this entire channel isn't just roundups of what I've been reading, but we actually talk about stuff a little bit more in depth. I hope you're good. Hope everything is peachy with you. I hope Storm Doris did not cause you too much harm. Hasn't properly set in yet, but she's getting there, and I'll see you next week.